Hello, X-Bible. This is Alex. Offerings and sacrifices to God. We all know that they were done since early in man's history. In the Bible, we have an account, the earliest account we have of an offering to God is in the story of Cain and Abel. We see in Genesis 4 that Cain offered fruit of the ground to God, while Abel, his brother, offered the firstborn of his sheep. Later on in the Bible, we have a whole system of ceremonies that were practiced by the nation of Israel. There are many feasts and holidays where you would give offerings to God. You would maybe give offerings to atone for sins you've committed, or sometimes just to praise the Lord for all the things that God has done for you. Also, the very thing, the object you offered to God could vary. There are provisions set in the Bible depending on whether you would be offering a bull, a goat, a sheep, doves, or even bread. But what about children? Yes, children. We know that a lot of ancient cultures sacrificed their kids to their gods. But did the God of the Bible accept sacrifices of children? Well, if we look in Deuteronomy 12, we see God telling the nation of Israel how to worship Him and to not do the things that the people that they're about to conquer are doing to worship their gods. If we read in Deuteronomy 12:31, it says, "You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods." And we have a slew of other verses that condemn the human sacrifices to God. So it looks like we're done, right? God doesn't accept human sacrifice. Well, actually, we're not done, because there actually was one part of the Bible where God does call for a human sacrifice. That was in the story of Abraham. Now, in Genesis, when Abraham was 75 years old, God comes to him and talks and tells him that he was going to be the father of a great nation, and that Abraham's going to have a son. Now, remember, Abraham's 75, and his wife Sarah is about 66 at this time. That obviously leads us to a problem. They're really old. Elderly people have a hard time having kids. Another problem is that Sarah's barren. Even when she was 20, she couldn't have kids. So now that she's 75, Abraham's 75 and she's 66, they're supposed to have faith that they have kids. And that takes a lot of faith. And after a while, they ran out of it. Because 10 years go by, Sarah still hasn't gotten pregnant yet, so she thinks of an idea. She says, "I have a servant named Hagar, an Egyptian servant named Hagar, and if I can't have a child, then Hagar could." So she tells Abraham to sleep with Hagar, and he does, and then they have a son. His name is Ishmael. Abraham's about 86 years old when Ishmael's born. Now, let's fast forward a few more years. Abraham is now 99 years old, okay? God comes to him again, and God says, "You're still going to have a son with Sarah, and you are going to be the father of the great nation through this new son, and this son is going to be named Isaac." Now, Abraham laughs because when this covenant was first made, Abraham was 75, and it didn't happen. Now he's 99, and his wife Sarah is 90, so it's even less likely they have a child now. But God says that he will have a son with Sarah, and they did. The next year, Isaac was born. So things are looking good now. They got this miraculous son that couldn't have happened naturally. God had to intervene, so things were great. But then God came to Abraham again a few years later, and he says that he wants a burnt offering. And the burnt offering isn't going to be an animal. In this case, he wants Isaac to be offered. Now, we don't know how Abraham actually reacted to this order from God. We don't know if Abraham might have thought he misunderstood him, or if Abraham prayed that God would change his mind, or maybe Abraham just went ahead and went off to offer his son without question? We don't know, but we do know that Abraham did love his son Isaac. But regardless of how he felt about it, he did eventually bring Isaac up to the mountain, and he set up the altar, he bound Isaac, and he laid him on the altar. Abraham grabs the knife, and just as he was about to slaughter his son, the angel of the Lord comes and tells Abraham to stop, because it was just a test. Abraham needed his faith to be tested, and Abraham passed. So the angel of God reaffirmed the covenant that he made with Abraham, that Abraham was going to be the patriarch of God's people through Isaac. And that's the story. But then, this leads to a question that a lot of people might ask. Why did God need to test Abraham? I mean, we know that God doesn't accept human sacrifices. So if Abraham, might rationalize that, well, this isn't right, could God blame that? To us, well, we have to first answer, why did Abraham need to be tested in the first place? Well, the thing is, did Abraham show any lack of faith in God? And unfortunately, he did. When Abraham was 75 and the covenant was originally made then, he did not have faith, and so that's why he slept with Hagar to have Ishmael. And if Abraham is going to be the patriarch of God's people, he's supposed to be the founder of the nation that God's going to use, he's supposed to be the example of someone with faith, then there should be no question about his faith. And if there was a question, then that wouldn't give a really good foundation for God's people, would it? And so I'd see that's why Abraham needed to be tested, so there would be no question about Abraham's faith. But now, what about Abraham himself? How could he have gone through with offering his son Isaac? Well, he probably could have, he was probably thinking about it, I'm sure. He may have thought that if he offered his son to sacrifice to God, he might have been seen as a murderer. He might have been seen as someone who was crazy and not to listen to. He may have even thought that if Isaac was supposed to be, if he was supposed to be the patriarch of God's nation through Isaac, how could that happen if Isaac is killed? So I'm sure he would have thought about that stuff as well. But it seems that he did not question how God would fulfill the covenant if Isaac was killed. It says in Hebrews that Abraham may have believed that the God who gave this miracle, don't remember the only reason why Isaac exists, first of all, is because God intervened. Abraham and Sarah weren't going to have any children except through God's help, which he did do. So if God gave them Isaac, would that give God the right to take him back? Well, either way, it says in Hebrews that Abraham thought that if Isaac died, God would be able to bring him back to life. And Abraham passed the test. So now we have many references in the Bible referring back to Abraham about how he is an example of someone who has faith. He's been an example to all of God's people through the Old and the New Testament. And if we look in Abraham's life, we can see all the things that God has done in his life. He led Abraham to live in new lands. He helped Abraham in a battle to save Lot, his nephew. And of course, he made the miracle of Isaac's birth. So when God does so many miracles in your life, you can see how that person could have so much faith. But if Abraham could have that kind of faith, then why not you? Why can't we have that kind of faith too? Because if we look back in our lives, can you see what God has done in your lives? Has God ever brought you out of a situation that wasn't good for you? Did he bring you into a new situation that continually blesses you even today? If you see God's work in your life or in the lives of the people around you, you have all the evidence you have to have strong faith. in God. So, if you have faith, then why not have the faith of Abraham? Thanks for watching.